Snow fell gently over the burned fields where once green forests had stood. The sky above was heavy and gray, hiding the sun's warmth behind a veil of ash and ice. All around the valley, the bodies of both humans and aliens lay silent. The war had come without warning, and no one was ready for it. Ronan knelt beside a fallen soldier, closing her eyes with trembling fingers. He didn't know her name. She wore the mark of the Eastern Gate, a place he had only heard about in stories. Now the stories were real, and the war was in his hands. The signal had reached Earth 2 weeks earlier. A breach in the barrier fields. Alien invaders, unlike any seen before, had crossed through the stars and landed on the colony moons. First, the outer rings fell, then the core gates. By the time the Terran Council reacted, half the system had turned into ruins. Ronan wasn't a general. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a hunter from the northern ice belts. But when the ships burned his village and took the survivors, he picked up the blade left behind by a dying captain. That was when everything changed. The blade wasn't ordinary. It hummed in his hand and glowed when the sky turned dark. Others noticed. Soldiers began to follow him. Some whispered he was chosen. Others said he was cursed. Ronan didn't care about stories. He only wanted to find his sister, taken by the invaders during the first attack. On the 4th night, while snowstorms raged over the battlefield, Ronan heard a voice. It wasn't human. It came from the rocks, the wind, and even from within, his own mind. He followed it through fire and frost until he saw her. She stood alone, tall and still, her blue skin glowing softly under the icy moonlight. Her armor was unlike any alien design he had seen. It was silver, covered in ancient symbols. Her long, dark hair was braided with threads of firestone. She held no weapon, but her eyes held a storm. Ronan raised his sword, not out of anger, but caution. The alien woman didn't move. She looked at him as if she had been waiting. Then she knelt, pressing her hand into the snow, and said something in her tongue. The translator in his ear failed to catch it, but his heart understood. They didn't fight, not that night, not even the next day. They walked together through ruins and silence, neither trusting the other, yet neither turning away. The woman called herself Viel. She said nothing about her purpose, but she knew too much about him. Viel guided Ronan through enemy lines without being seen. When soldiers chased them, she vanished and returned only when it was safe. When Ronan asked why she was helping him, she simply said it was not time to explain. He didn't trust her. But he followed her. Or rather, he walked beside her, not behind, not ahead. And with every step, he wondered what her true goal was. His sword still hummed near her. That worried him most. One night, as they rested near a shattered fortress, Viel turned to him and asked softly, "Will you follow me to the end?" Ronan looked at her long and hard, then answered with a voice colder than the wind, "No. I'll walk beside you. Though I know you'll betray me." The wind screamed across the high cliffs as the two walked side by side. Sharp ice crystals struck their faces like tiny blades. Ronan kept his hood tight, his eyes always scanning the path ahead. Viel walked, calmly, her steps never hurried. It was as if the cold could not touch her. They crossed through the ruins of a forgotten outpost. Old flags hung in shreds, frozen in place. Burnt metal frames stuck out of the snow like broken bones. Ronan paused to check for signs of life, but the silence answered before she did. There were no survivors here. They took shelter inside a hollowed tunnel beneath the mountain wall. Cracks in the ceiling let in slivers of cold light. Ronan gathered dry stone and broken tools to make a small fire. Viel watched him without speaking. Her silence had a weight of its own. Ronan finally broke it. "Where are you leading me?" he asked. She did not meet his gaze. Instead, she unhooked a small device from her belt and placed it on the floor. A glowing map flickered to life in the air. The path they were on was marked by red symbols. She pointed to a symbol deep within the enemy zone. "Here," she said. "This is where your sister is being kept." Ronan's hand clenched into a fist. And you know this how? Vial closed the map and said only one word. Because I helped take her. Ronan's sword was in his hand before he even knew it. The fire crackled behind him, casting shadows on the tunnel walls. Vial did not move. She looked at him without fear, her armor catching the fire's light. I did what I had to do, she said. You kidnapped her, Ronan growled. You started this war. Vial shook her head. No. I followed orders. I was born into them, just as you were born into yours. But I left them behind the moment I saw what they were doing to your people. His blade trembled, still raised. His breath came in clouds. She stayed still. One wrong move and she would fall. But something in her voice stopped him. It was not guilt. It was sorrow. The kind that could not be faked. I didn't come to Earth to fight, she continued. I came to stop something worse. Something even my own kind fears. But your leaders never listened. So I crossed the lines. Alone. Ronan slowly lowered his blade. The fire dimmed. Only the sound of wind above filled the silence. If I follow. You, Ronan said. I'll be walking toward the same people who ruined my world. Vial nodded. Yes, but I'm not asking you to follow. You already chose to walk beside me. They rested in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, snow fell thicker than before. The stars were hidden behind gray clouds. Tomorrow, they would climb into territory controlled by the High Blades, elite killers trained from birth to hunt rebels. Ronan knew the risk, but his heart burned hotter than any warning. He had seen too much to turn away. Vial had answers he needed. She had a reason. And somewhere beyond the frost and steel, his sister was still alive. In the morning, they packed without speaking. The fire had died, but the path was clear. Ronan glanced at Vial as they stepped into the storm. You still think I'll trust you? He asked. She gave a faint smile and whispered, No. I only want you to see the truth before the end. The path grew steeper as they moved toward the mountain pass. Snow packed deep between jagged rocks and made each step harder. Ronan walked ahead this time, his grip tight around the sword hilt. Vial followed in silence, her armor shining with frost. They passed broken machines half buried in ice. These were not human. The wreckage belonged to Vial's kind. Ronan stopped beside one large structure with a cracked emblem. What is this? He asked. A scout crawler, she answered. It was one of ours. The machine had been torn apart from the inside. Wires spilled like frozen veins across the ground. Blood stained the snow, but it was dark and oily, not red. Something had destroyed the crawler and left no survivors. Vial studied the wreck with narrowed eyes. This wasn't a human attack, she said. Ronan looked around. No footprints, no smoke, no signs of battle, just the wind and the weight of something unseen. What did this? He asked. Vial's voice dropped low. Something we no longer control. They didn't rest that night. The wind howled louder, and the shadows felt closer. Ronan lit no fire. Vial kept watch without blinking. Somewhere in the dark, a strange sound echoed. Not a howl. Not metal. It was something that made the sword in Ronan's hand hum again. He remembered the first time it hummed. Back on Earth, right before the invasion. He'd thought it was broken tech. But now he knew better. The blade responded to something beyond steel. Something alive. Something old. At dawn, they reached the ridge. Below them stretched a frozen plain covered in sharp ice spikes. In the center stood a black tower rising from the earth like a wound. That's where your sister is, Vial said. Ronan clenched his jaw and stared down at the distant spire. Before they could move, a figure appeared at the edge of the cliff. Tall, armored, and holding a twin-bladed staff. Its face was hidden behind a mask of bone. Ronan stepped forward, blade ready. Vial raised a hand. Let me speak to him, she said. The masked figure said nothing as she approached. Then he pointed the staff toward Ronan and spoke in Vale's native tongue. His voice sounded hollow, as if it came from inside stone. Ronan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. "He says you don't belong here," Vale translated, "and that I've betrayed my kind by bringing you." Ronan didn't lower his sword. "Then he's right on both counts," he said. "Tell him to move or I'll cut him down." Vale turned to the figure and spoke with sharp words. The masked warrior didn't flinch. Instead, he slammed the staff into the ground. A shockwave knocked snow loose from the cliffs. Ronan braced himself, but Vale stood firm. The warrior removed his mask. His face was pale blue, marked with glowing scars. His eyes were cold. Ronan could tell he was old, not in body, but in soul. The kind of old that had seen too many wars. He looked at Vale and spoke one final word. "He is my brother," Vale whispered, "and he will not let us pass without blood." Ronan stepped beside her. "Then let him bleed first," he said. The warrior raised his weapon. Ronan raised his blade. Vale didn't move. The clash came fast. Sparks flew as steel met alien alloy. Ronan struck with fury. The masked warrior moved like lightning. Vale shouted warnings, but Ronan barely heard her. He was focused only on the enemy before him. A final blow struck true. Ronan's sword cut across the warrior's chest, sending him crashing into the snow. Breathing hard, Ronan looked at Vale. She stared at the fallen figure with a pained expression and said nothing. Her silence spoke, more than words. The snow around the fallen warrior turned dark as his blood soaked into the ground. Vale knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his chest. Ronan stood back, his blade still dripping. The wind had stopped, and the silence felt heavy. "I didn't want this," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of pain. Ronan said nothing. He had seen too many lies painted with sorrow. Still, something in her face made him hesitate before turning away. The masked warrior's body began to fade, not rot or burn, but dissolve into glowing fragments. Ronan took a step forward in alarm. Vale raised a hand. "It's his armor," she said. "It was linked to the core. It pulls him back when he dies." "Pulls him where?" Ronan asked. Vale stood up, brushing snow from her knee. "To the hive, to the source, to what controls them now." Her words carried fear. Not for her, but for what waited ahead. Ronan felt it too. They made their way down the cliff, careful not to slip, on the frozen ridges. The tower in the distance grew taller with every step. Ronan glanced at Vale. "If he was your brother," he said, "why did you let me kill him?" She didn't answer right away. "He made his choice," she finally said, "just like I made mine. That is how survival works in my world. Blood decides loyalty, but purpose decides truth." Ronan didn't fully understand, but he knew enough to stop asking. They reached the edge of the plain. Ice spikes towered around them like jagged teeth. It was a graveyard of ancient battles, weapons frozen in mid-swing, machines half-submerged, creatures locked in glassy death. The cold had preserved everything. Among the frozen figures, Ronan saw humans, soldiers from Earth. Some he recognized by uniform, others by face. His chest tightened. These men had died long before the call for help ever reached the colonies. No one had told their stories. Vale stopped beside a statue of a young woman. Her armor was cracked, her eyes frozen open in terror. "She tried to flee," Vale said, "but the hive found her. It doesn't forgive deserters, even on our side." Ronan looked at the woman's face and said nothing. Far ahead, the tower pulsed with dark light. It wasn't made of stone or metal. It looked alive, as if it grew from the earth itself. The closer they got, the warmer the air became. The snow melted near its base. Steam rose from the cracks. "We shouldn't go in without a plan," Ronan warned. Vale nodded. "There's no going back once we step inside. The tower watches. It learns. If it senses fear, it will use it." Ronan touched the hilt of his sword and whispered, "Then let it learn pain." They entered through a narrow opening between two bone-like pillars. Inside, the air shimmered with heat and whispers. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat. Light came, from veins running through the floor. Each step echoed like thunder. Ronan tried to stay calm, but his hands were sweating. The sword no longer hummed. It burned. The heat moved up his arm and into his chest. Vial noticed and stopped. "It knows you're here," she said. "It remembers the blade. It remembers the last one who carried it." "Who was that?" Ronan asked. Vial looked at him and said, "The first human who walked these halls. He didn't survive. But the sword did. It chose you. That means it wants something more this time." Suddenly the path ahead split open. From the glowing pit, a voice rose, not with sound, but directly into Ronan's thoughts. It spoke in broken words, sharp and ancient. "Return what was taken or suffer what was promised." Ronan looked at Vial. "What did we take?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her face had gone pale. Her next words chilled him more than the cold outside. "I think they mean me." Ronan stared at Vial, trying to understand what she meant. The heat of the tower pressed against his skin. His fingers tightened around the sword as her words echoed in his mind. "They mean me," she had said, and the tower responded with a low pulse. He took a step back. "Why would they want you?" he asked. Vial walked slowly to the edge of the pit, her expression unreadable. "Because I left," she said. "Because I disobeyed the will of the hive. No one has ever done that before and walked free." Ronan looked down into the glowing hole. Shadows twisted within the light. The voice returned, filling his head with broken thoughts. "She was made by us. She was formed in code and blood. She carries what was stolen. She must return." The blade in Ronan's hand grew heavier. It pulsed in rhythm with the tower. He gritted his teeth and looked at Vial. "Is that true?" he asked. "Are you some kind of weapon?" Vial turned toward him, her face calm but sad. "I was designed to command," she said. "Not to feel. Not to care. But something broke inside me when I saw what the hive was doing to your kind. I changed. And change is forbidden." Her voice didn't shake. She didn't beg for trust. She only gave truth. Ronan lowered his sword, but did not sheath it. "They want you back," he said. "And if they can't have you, they'll take me instead." Vial nodded. "Or they'll take us both. The tower feeds on memory. It twists what we are. That's how it defends itself." The path ahead darkened. Walls closed in around them, forming long, narrow corridors. Strange images flickered on the walls. Ronan saw flashes of his past. His village burning. His sister screaming. His father's last words lost in smoke. He reached for Vial, but she was already frozen in place. Her eyes wide. Her mouth open, but silent. Ronan stepped in front of her and the images shifted. Now they showed her past. A laboratory. Tubes and wires. Pain without sound. She was only a child. "This is how they control," she whispered. "By making us relive it all. By forcing guilt and fear to guide our steps. But we are not those memories anymore." Her hand reached out and touched the wall. The images cracked and faded. Ronan steadied himself and pressed forward. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. In the center floated a glowing sphere, pulsing with black and red light. Around it stood figures, humanoid but empty. Their eyes glowed with the same light as the core. Vial stepped forward. "They are echoes," she said. "Created to defend this place. They are what's left of those who failed the tower's test." Ronan gripped his sword and walked beside her. "Then we won't fail." The echoes turned. Their movements were slow but precise. Ronan charged the nearest one. His sword struck true, but the creature did not fall. It split in two, and became two enemies. Vial shouted, "Don't attack blindly. They multiply by contact." Ronan backed off and circled the room. Vielle stood still, her arms raised. She began to speak in the old language. The echoes froze. The sphere dimmed. The tower trembled. She turned to Ronan. I can hold them, but... Not for long. You must strike the core. Without waiting, Ronan sprinted toward the sphere. The floor cracked beneath him. The sword glowed white-hot. He leapt, drove the blade straight into the heart of the sphere, and shouted with all the strength left in him. A blast of light filled the chamber. The echoes vanished. The walls shook. The sphere shattered into dust. Ronan collapsed to his knees. Vielle rushed to him, her voice soft but steady. It's not over, but now we've broken the mind of the tower. Ronan's breath came in gasps, as the dust from the shattered core settled around him. His arms trembled, but he still held the sword tightly. The glowing light had faded, but his body felt scorched inside. The blade no longer hummed. It was silent now. Vielle helped him to his feet. Her touch was firm and her eyes stayed focused on the crumbling walls. The tower's structure groaned as if it were alive and wounded. We have little time, she said. The collapse will begin from within. They hurried through the shifting corridors. What once felt alive now cracked under its own weight. Walls turned to ash, ceilings split apart. The ground trembled beneath every step. Ronan pushed, forward with all his remaining strength. Flashes of memory still lingered in the air, ghosts of pain, whispers of doubt. But Ronan had seen the truth now. The tower was not a god. It was a prison, a living trap made to feed on fear. And now, it was dying. They reached the outer gate just as the path behind them fell into darkness. Light burst from the cracks and swallowed the chamber whole. Outside, cold air rushed in like a storm, sweeping away the heat and silence. The stars above felt brighter than ever. Ronan fell to his knees in the snow. His body ached. His mind spun. But he was alive. Vielle stood beside him, her face turned toward the stars. She looked both free and afraid. They know, she said. The hive will feel what we've done. He looked up at her. Let them come, he said. We've already burned the heart of their machine. Vielle nodded slowly. Yes, but that was only a part of them. The hive itself is greater. It lives across minds and worlds. It is not done. Ronan pulled himself up with effort. His sword was lighter now, as if its purpose had changed. He felt different too. Not stronger, not faster, just clearer. As if something inside him had snapped into place, they began walking again. The path led through silent valleys marked with fallen machines and strange black stones. Ronan recognized none of it. Where are we now? He asked. Vielle scanned. The horizon. Near the nesting grounds, she answered. He frowned. What nests? Her answer came without pause. The hive sends its children here to grow. If they survive the tower, they earn their place. If they don't, they feed the next generation. Her words were cold and heavy.
Suddenly, a sharp cry echoed across the plains. Both turned toward the sound. In the distance, several creatures moved quickly over the ice, insect-like with armored limbs and glowing red eyes. Ronan counted at least 6. They're scouts, Vielle said. They're fast, too fast to fight out in the open. We need cover. Ronan spotted a broken transport vehicle nearby. They sprinted toward it as the creatures gave chase. Snow kicked up under their boots. They dove behind the metal. Wreck! Ronan peered through a crack. The scouts were already spreading out, sniffing the air. Their bodies clicked with strange rhythm. Vielle whispered, "If they mark us, the swarm will follow. We can't let them signal." Ronan held the sword tight. "Then we stop them here," he said. Vielle's hand closed around her blade. "No, mercy," she replied. "Not this time." They waited as the first scout crept closer, unaware of the strike it would soon face. With perfect timing, Ronan leapt forward. His sword slashed cleanly. The creature shrieked as it fell. Vielle moved, like fire, cutting 2 more before they reacted. The remaining scouts turned to flee, but Ronan hurled his blade through the last one's core. The field went quiet again. Snow blew gently across the ground. Ronan retrieved his sword and turned to Vale. "If this is what follows us," he said, "then I need to know what waits at the end." Vale didn't smile. She only whispered, "The end is where your sister is, and where I'll have to face my creators again." The stars had begun to fade by the time Ronan and Vale reached the edge of the breeding grounds. A thick mist rolled over the frozen land, rising from cracks in the earth. The air smelled of metal and old blood. Even the wind moved slower here. Tall spires rose from the ground, like bones reaching toward the sky. Between them lay pits covered with organic netting. The walls pulsed with faint red light. Ronan kept his hand on his sword. Vile moved quietly beside him, her eyes always scanning. "This place feels wrong," Ronan said. Vile nodded without turning. "Because it is," she answered. "Everything here was built to shape life, not honor it. They create in numbers, not in names. The hive doesn't raise children. It produces them. They stepped over scattered armor and broken weapons. None of it was human. These were old, from before Earth ever knew of the hive." Ronan paused beside a cracked helmet. Inside there was no skull, only dust and ash. A screech echoed across the grounds. They dropped low. From one of the pits, a large creature emerged. Its legs were armored. Its body glowed with internal heat. Its face had no eyes, only slits that opened and closed like breathing wounds. Bell whispered, "It's a seer. They don't speak, they listen. And once they know your voice, they never forget it." Ronan stayed quiet, waiting until the creature turned and vanished between the towers. Then they moved again. They reached the central structure just as the first light of morning touched the horizon. A dome of dark glass stood before them. Ronan stepped forward, but Vile held him back. "Let me go first," she said. "They built this place from my blood." She pressed her hand to a glowing panel. The door hissed open. The room beyond was dark, quiet, and filled with machines that hummed softly. Rows of stasis chambers lined the walls. Ronan's heart raced. Inside one of them, a familiar face appeared. His sister floated in suspended sleep, her body unharmed, her face peaceful. Ronan dropped his sword and ran to the chamber. He slammed his hand against the glass. "Talia," he breathed. "I found you." A voice echoed through the chamber, cold, artificial. "Human anomaly detected. Host vessel compromised. Initiating containment." The doors behind them sealed. The lights turned red. Ronan spun to face the room. Vile drew her weapon. "They were waiting," she said. "This was never going to be easy." From the ceiling, metallic limbs dropped down. Drones swarmed, weapons charged. Ronan grabbed his sword again. He swung with fury. The blade sang through metal and sparks flew. Vile moved beside him, striking with perfect precision. The machines fell quickly, but more came. The chamber shook with alarms and voice commands. "Return the traitor! Reclaim the vessel! End the broken code!" The words repeated. Ronan cut down another drone. "They mean you," he said. Vile didn't answer. She moved to the control panel and began entering commands. "I can break the lock," she said. "But once it opens, the hive will try to take her mind. They'll inject the control signal. We have seconds." Ronan nodded. "Then I'll hold them off. Just save her." Vile's fingers flew across the panel. Sparks flew from the system. The chamber holding Talia began to glow. Inside, her eyes fluttered open. Ronan turned, swinging his sword again as drones swarmed him from every side. The chamber popped open. Steam rose. Talia collapsed into Vile's arms. Vile dragged her to safety while Ronan kept fighting. Blood ran down his arm. His blade grew, heavier with each strike. Still he did not fall. The last drone fell. Ronan dropped to one knee. Vile stood over him, her face unreadable. "You chose to stay beside me," she said, "even when you knew I would betray something." Ronan looked up at her with blood on his lips and whispered, "But not me." Talia's breathing was shallow, but steady. Her eyes fluttered open again as the cold air hit her skin. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Ronan caught her in his arms and lowered her gently to the ground. Vasil stepped back, her hand pressed against her chest. Something inside her suit blinked red. She staggered but kept her balance. Ronan looked at her and saw that her armor was cracked and leaking light. "You're hurt," he said. She shook her head slowly. "Not hurt," she said. "Breaking." Ronan stared in confusion. She touched the side of her neck, where glowing veins pulsed. "The link to the hive is dying. When I broke the lock, I severed the last thread. I'm no longer theirs." Ronan laid his sister down beside the wall and turned to Vale. "Then that means you're free," he said. Vale smiled faintly. "It means I'm unfinished," she answered. "I was never built to exist without them, but I'd rather die myself than live for them." Outside, the ground rumbled. The tower they had escaped began to sink. Spires collapsed inward. Fires lit the mist as distant swarms howled across the frozen land. The hive had felt the damage, and now it was coming. Ronan stood tall, sword in hand. His wounds bled, but his steps remained strong. He looked out at the growing shadow across the horizon. He knew they had only moments. "We'll never outrun them," he said. "Not all of us." Vael met his gaze. "Then not all of us should run," she said. "You have to take her. Your sister must leave this ground. She still carries a mind untouched by the hive. She is hope for your kind." He hesitated, his fingers clenched. "You want me to leave you here?" She nodded. "You already knew this. From the start, you saw who I was, and still you walked beside me. That's more than anyone else ever did." Talia stirred. Her voice was weak but clear. "Ronan, go, please. She's right. Don't let it all be for nothing." Ronan pressed his forehead to hers and then slowly rose. He walked over to Vael and held out the sword. She looked at the blade, then at him. "This is yours," she said. He shook his head. "It was never mine. It chose me because I was willing to fight. Now it's your turn to hold it." Vael took the blade. It pulsed faintly in her hand. She turned and faced the horizon where the swarm approached. Ronan picked up Talia and started toward the ridge. Behind him, the sky darkened with flying shapes. He didn't look back, but he heard the sound, the blades singing, the wind screaming. And then silence, a silence filled with meaning, the kind that spoke louder than any cry. He kept walking, one foot after another. They reached the extraction point as the first escape shuttle descended. Medics rushed forward and took Talia from his arms. She was alive, safe, and when she smiled at him, he finally allowed himself to breathe. An officer approached him, eyes wide. "You came out of the hive grounds. No one ever does." Ronan didn't answer. He just looked back toward the burning mist, toward where Vael stood, toward where she made her last choice. "She stayed," he said, "so others wouldn't have to." The officer asked him something else, but he didn't hear it. His mind stayed with her, with the promise she had kept even when everything else broke. Later, they tried to honor her with medals and words, but Ronan didn't speak at those ceremonies. He went back to the ice, back to where it ended, and when the wind blew through the empty tower roots, he whispered one truth into the snow. She walked alone, but never unloved.